There are plenty of guys to choose from, but who ends up on the Mount Rushmore of the greatest Commanders / WFT / Redskins of all time? We'll have that next here on Ref the District. Let's go.
Greetings and salutations and welcome to Ref the District. We're back. Chaos has reigned for the last few months and we haven't been able to provide you content outside of our Wednesday live show. But Stoner, we're back into business, getting our lives together, making sure that we have the time to provide great content for you, our viewer. And what we're doing here in the summer is our Mount Rushmore segment, where we're going to go through each of the big franchises within DC and come up with the players players, coaches, people associated with those programs and who would be on the Mount Rushmore. Commanders are up here first, Stoner. And I think it's important to note that each of these Mount Rushmores is going to look a little different because not all of them kind of have the same feel. Some of these franchises aren't as storied as the others.
Sure.
Some of them might not have the Hall of Fame caliber, players or coaches to fill up the four heads. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see where we land on each of these. And that'll be part of the first discussion we're going to have here. But I did want to note for our viewers, you get a say in who is on the Mount Rushmore for each of the teams and our final DC Mount Rushmore. You just have to join us on our Wednesday show where we discuss it live, and we'll also have a poll up there so that way you get to join the conversation. That's what we're big here on Ref the District, is you joining the conversation. I don't think I introduced myself, but I'm Nathan. That's the Stoner here. And Stoner, let's get this rolling here with the Washington Redskins football team, Commanders, Mount Rushmore. What are the parameters that you have for, where you were trying to find and hone in? Because we haven't shared our lists yet. We don't know who is on our list and how we kind of came about there. So who do you have, or we'll get to who do you have later. How did you get to who you had?
Okay, well, let me set you up first here with a question. A very, very loaded question. Who is the greatest player who's ever played in this uniform?
I mean,
it's kind of a random question.
For me personally, Darrell Green.
Commanders uniform.
Yeah. Darrell Green would be mine.
That's incorrect.
Okay.
Deion Sanders played for this team.
Yeah.
Adrian Peterson played for this team.
That's a good one.
Right? So
not that Deion isn't better than Adrian Peterson, but I do prefer Adrian Peterson over Deion. Yeah.
Right. So we have to, that's sort of the parameters that we have to weed out. Are guys like that eligible who played 1 season here, 1.5 seasons, 2 seasons, whatever? Or do they need to be lifetime players? Or do they need to be a majority of their time with this organization? Do we include, I hate to say it, but right now we're the Commanders. Do we say Redskins? Do we go back to the Redskins time frame and choose them? I mean, I think we do.
Yeah, they're all part of the same franchise.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think there's anybody who's on this current squad. Spoiler alert, who deserves to be on Mount Rushmore.
What? You gotta be kidding me.
Yeah. So there's no current commander. I don't even think I have anybody from I don't have anybody from the football team on here. Mine are all Redskins.
Yeah, of course. And that makes total sense that it's going to be all. But again, those are the parameters. And then also, are we including coaches? Are we including front office execs? Are we including owners? All of these things kind of have to be hashed out before we can come up with our final list. And I don't know that there's necessarily a line in the sand that we need to come up with. But when we're making an argument about a certain person that we believe should go on the list, those may come into play. And a perfect example, like I said, is like a Deion Sanders or Adrian Peterson, who played for this team, who are some of the Adrian Peterson is a top 10 running back of all time.
Sure.
And he played on this team. Deion Sanders is a top 5 cornerback, maybe the best cornerback in the history of the NFL.
Certainly the loudest.
Definitely the loudest, but he backed it up.
Sure.
Right. So should he be considered? And I don't think he should for this
No,
particular list.
I think
but,
when you go down to it, I don't even think they have to be lifers,
right.
because you have players like Art Monk who didn't, finish with the Washington franchise. But I think they have to be known for being in the burgundy and gold, right? And I do think you have to include coaches, because I think especially with Washington, more so than the other franchises, the coaches were well known, right? The coaches were ones, but in that regard, Lombardi was a Washington coach.
There you go.
So would you include him? He's considered one of the greatest, if not the greatest coach of all time. But I think that he wasn't known for his time in Washington. In fact, I think even some Washington fans don't even realize that he coached here for a couple seasons.
Didn't he pass away as the coach, or did he just retire and then he passed away? He might have been actually the coach when he passed away for the Redskins at that time. I could have my facts mixed up. You'll probably hear me say that a lot, that I have my facts mixed up here, because some of the guys that I'm going to vouch for come from a different era than what we're all aware of or that we all pay attention to.
Sure.
But some of the guys on the list, Nathan, that I considered that did not make the list, that I want to throw out at you real quick. Okay.
All right. These are honorable mentions. We're going to get to
honorable mentions.
Okay. Before you get there, let's make sure everyone's clear on the parameters. Has to be known for being a part of this franchise. Can't be a one-off. Can't be somebody who came here for a couple seasons. Has to be known primarily as somebody who rocked the burgundy and gold.
Yep.
You can be a coach. We're talking. Are we excluding anyone who's not in the Hall of Fame, or are we going to
No, you can include them if you have a strong enough argument.
I don't think Hall of Fame is necessary, though it's a strong argument for. Any other parameter that we're missing? I think that's really it. Known for burgundy and gold, impact on the franchise, and there we go. All right. So these are your honorable mentions. These are ones who didn't make the final four heads,
in my opinion. These are not necessarily what Ref the District is going to come up with in the end, but in my opinion, these guys didn't make the list. The first one you're going to laugh at, but I did consider Kirk Cousins. I consider Kirk Cousins because he did some things while he was here, whether you liked him or not, or he didn't win necessarily, but the sort of stats that he put up while he was here.
We're not starting off on a strong foot, are we? I mean, I don't even put this guy as an honorable mention. I'm not going to argue too much about this because we're not even getting to the meat of the topic here.
Yep.
But you've got to be kidding me. Anyways, moving on.
Bobby Mitchell.
Okay.
I did not.
That's a good one.
Did not put him in there. I did consider him.
Mm-hmm.
Art Monk. You mentioned him.
Yeah.
He's not on my final four.
Mm-hmm.
And one that you might kill me for. Everybody might. But I'm not putting Sonny on my final four.
Wow.
I'm not. Especially I will say this because I've reconsidered the parameter that we talked about. I did not consider coaches originally because I thought this was more player centric, but I think Joe Gibbs,
when you're talking about the franchise, Mount Rushmore, the people you think of with the team, I think that especially with Washington, that there's a couple of coaches on mine. Spoiler alert.
Oh, couple.
Not just one.
Oh, wow.
But two coaches on my list.
Here's one more I forgot to write down, but I didn't consider also is John Riggins. I did consider. I keep saying I didn't consider. I did consider, but didn't make my final.
He just missed mine. Dexter Manley was another one that just missed mine.
Okay. That's a pretty good one. Is there anybody within the last 30 years? Now I consider Kirk Cousins, but is there anybody since the Super Bowl era? Is there anybody that you considered that didn't make your list?
Unfortunately, Trent Williams was one that I almost immediately discarded. I think that is if he would have stayed with Washington, continued playing at the caliber that he did, I think he would have been one that could have easily have been a contender. But for the last 30 years, I mean, you have a lot of okay to good players, but I don't know that you have anyone who reached the level of the previous, generations, right? The two generations before that, where we're winning Super Bowls, or we're much more of a contender and a winning franchise. I mean, those two generations before this last one, this 30 years that you talk about, Stoner, are the reason why Washington is still pretty high up on the all-time wins list,
right?
And even per winning percentage. Because you got to think, these last 30 years, we've been stinking it up. But we're
Right.
still up there as far as one of the top franchises when it comes to wins and winning percentage, because of the work that those two generations before put in.
You got like Ryan Kerrigan, Clinton Portis, Chris Cooley, maybe even, can from the most recent generation
Sure.
players.
There's like
But,
C tier guys when you're talking Mount Rushmore. I mean, they're
absolutely.
the ones that, when you're going through, you look at them, you're like, hey, this guy was good, but no, right? When we're talking about those honorable mentions earlier, Art Monk, Dexter Manley, John Riggins, like those guys you look long and hard at, and then you start kind of going, oh, well, is it this here? So those are our B tier guys. The guys you mentioned, I love them. They're great.
Yeah.
They're definitely a part of the core identity of my time as one of the younger guys, watching this franchise. But like they're you immediately you're like, they're not as good, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So,
Yep. You're right. So they don't make the list, but
mhm.
because this is a storied franchise, because this is a franchise that goes back 80 plus years, there's a lot of guys to choose from. When you have 3 Super Bowls plus a couple other championships pre-Super Bowl, there's a lot of guys who have contributed to what the organization is today, or what it was 30 years ago, that you have to consider so many guys, because this is a heritage franchise, whether you like it or not. Like you said, they're still up there in wins. They're still up there in the most valuable franchises in the world. So you got a lot of guys to choose from. Do we want to go like our number 4 down to 1?
I think we get rid of the easy one first.
Okay.
And then we can go through the debate on Sonny.
Okay.
All right. How about this? I don't think anybody's making a Washington Redskin Mount Rushmore without Joe Gibbs.
You're right. You're right. And I hadn't considered him originally because I hadn't considered coaches.
You didn't consider coaches, yeah.
I can acquiesce, I think is the right word, and say that, yeah, he should be on the Mount Rushmore. Joe Gibbs should be on there. What he did while he was here. His second turn sort of tarnished it a little because of what they didn't do, let's just say, right? I mean, relatively speaking, compared to what has happened before that window and since that window, he's the greatest coach in the last 30 years.
Yeah, that's what I always tell people with that one, because people always talk about how that second stint tarnished his record. I'm like, if you look at everything surrounding his 4 years, where he had competitive teams and playoffs, right? Like playoff win, like he bona fide Hall of Famer. Obviously, he was already a Hall of Fame coach when he came back. But and a lot of people's eyes in the DMV, the DC area, or in Burgundy and Gold, the best coach of all time. Yeah, winning 3 Super Bowls with 3 different QBs.
Sure.
His winning percentage, just like what he was able to do, and then coming back and still just being competitive after most people would have said the game had passed him by. Just outstanding.
Okay. Yep. And so we'll put him on there. I'm happy to.
All right, Joe Gibbs, lock.
All right, he's one.
Let's get to the Sonny discussion here, because Sonny is on mine, but you have him listed as an honorable mention. You didn't put him on, and you kind of teased a little bit there, Stoner, about why you wouldn't put Sonny on your Mount Rushmore.
Look, what Sonny's contributions to this organization cannot be overstated. He's been great. Especially, I mean, post-playing career. He was with this organization for another 40 years, whatever it was. So his contributions cannot be overlooked. I'm not trying to sort of put him down or denigrate his legacy within the organization, but I had him at number 5 of my top 4 guys. And so I couldn't put him on there because some of his best years were in an Eagles uniform. And so he had some great years with Philadelphia. He had some great years with Washington. But if you take just the Washington part, and again, he had some great years there, but he also had some great years with Philadelphia. So that's where I kind of knock him down just a peg. I mean, his 1961 season with Philadelphia is one of the best seasons that a quarterback can have in terms of, relatively speaking, to his peers during that time. So I have to say that he did that in an Eagles uniform, and that tarnishes it just a little bit, just enough to knock him off the top four.
It's interesting because one of our parameters is that the player has to be known for being burgundy and gold. And I would say most, if not all people, NFL wide, not just Washington, would say Sonny is a Washington Redskin.
Oh,
No one
100%.
would associate him outside of that, right? So
Oh,
it's
100%.
interesting that you're knocking him for having successful years outside of Washington when most people would just say that he is a Washington great. And I mean, you know this because you have him at 5, but it's interesting. I'm interested to see where you go because with this, who your top 4 are, because to me, the things he did in his career, being known as a Washington player, being as good as he was on all facets, right? This is a football player. You know, you talked about him being a QB, but he also played defense. He also returned kicks. Like he did it all. And he was a fascinating player to watch in NFL history. Is considered one of the greater players of all time. Like, especially when you look at that generation, football has evolved so much. So it's not quite like baseball where you have, Babe Ruth and Joe DiMaggio, where these legends just continue to grow about how good they were. Right. But Sonny Jurgensen was that guy, right? He was at that level for NFL when he was on the field. He was must watch. He was one of the players that everybody knew Sonny Jurgensen, and people knew him as a Washington great, which is why he makes my Mount Rushmore, but doesn't make yours.
Well, guess what, Nathan? He's not even the best quarterback in team history, and it's not even close. Sammy Baugh is I'm sorry to, Darrell Green, who we're going to talk about here in a second as well. I think he's the greatest player in team history. The only knock against him is that he played 80 years ago. So that's a long time ago, and it's a different game, obviously. But what Sammy Baugh did during his time with Washington is almost unprecedented, the things that he did. Do you realize some of the things that he did in 1943? Again, that's 80 plus years ago that he did this. But in 1943, he led the league in completions, attempts, completion percentage, rating, quarterback rating. He threw 23 touchdowns, which at the time was a huge amount of touchdowns. I think they only played 12 games at the time, and they didn't throw the ball a lot, which is all amazing, right? That he did all of these things. He also led the league in punting average. And guess what, Nathan? He led the league in defensive interceptions.
Yeah. Yeah, Sam is a good one.
That's insane.
Yeah, Sam is the all-around player that I was actually thinking about. So I don't know why I'm saying Sonny, maybe because it's been a while since I've talked to these. But yeah, Sammy is the one who did it all and at a high level. Although Sonny Jurgensen was on there and does have his own defensive stats and everything that he's registered. But I mean, both outstanding players when you're talking.
I mean, Sammy was player of the year twice, which is the equivalent to MVP nowadays. But back then it was player of the year. 8 times he was first or second team all pro. Some of the things in one game, Nathan, in the NFL at the time, he threw 4 touchdowns and intercepted 4 passes in one game. One guy did this. Now, you say it's a different game. I totally get it. The athletes weren't the same back then. But you can only compare it to relative to what the guys were doing at the time. Nobody else was doing this. Nobody else was quarterbacking, playing defense the entire time, and punting and doing all those things incredibly well. And when he retired, he had 13 NFL records to his name. His career is by far the best in this organization, and we all forget about it because it was 80 years. Nobody saw him play. All his highlights are in black and white. I get all of that.
Yeah,
But
if
just look at
you
what
can
he
find
did.
that, sure.
Yeah, but just look at what he did relative to the players at that time. His punting record, his average punting record, wasn't broken until like 2022 or
Sure.
2021, something like that. His season average, the high. It took 80 years for somebody to break his record, or about 75 years. This is incredible stuff that he did. And the things he did in college and high school, and we're not considering that. But I mean, he played minor league baseball. He coached afterwards. Sammy Baugh, greatest player in team history, bar none. Anyone wants to argue with me, they can argue with a wall, argue with your mother, whatever cliche that you want to use. And I know that's the old man stoner talking, but I truly believe the best player in the team's history.
Yeah, hard to argue. All that stuff I said about Sonny and whatnot, that's actually I was thinking Sammy Baugh.
Sammy Baugh.
I'm
It's
surprised he
a
didn't
rewind
correct
button.
me. I'm surprised he didn't correct me there. But yeah, Sammy
Well,
Baugh.
I mean, Sonny did have some all-around athletic
Yeah, he
ability.
did. He was
So it
still
wasn't just
special,
for-
and those two did kind of overlap a little bit as far as their talents are concerned and what they did and what they brought to the team. I can't argue with you that Sammy belongs on here, and I will replace Sonny Jurgensen because I refuse to replace the other two that I have. But yeah, no, that's good. And Sammy is a good one. I don't know why I wasn't thinking Sammy Baugh before. Maybe because, like you said, it is such an old pool. But all that stuff I said about Sonny was actually Sammy. When you're talking about a player who's just must watch, that was it. Sonny was also good, great franchise player, but we'll just miss it for the two of us.
And he played 16 years with Washington, all with Washington, won 2 titles as a player, and played in like at least 2 more championship games. So I mean, he was just amazing.
Yep. Good selection there. So we got Joe Gibbs and Sammy Baugh. We're both in agreement. Sonny Jurgensen on the outside looking in.
All right.
I'm going to give my next one. And this is a personal one. And this is one I'll never let go because as a fan, a nearly 40-year-old fan, this is who I always associated with Washington above all. And he's getting his jersey retired this year. Darrell Green is on my Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I don't think there's any debate about that either, Nathan. I think Darrell Green's a lock.
Yeah.
Joe Gibbs is a lock. Darrell Green's a lock. And I think Sammy Baugh is a lock. That fourth one is a little bit up in the air. And I have another, guy who was on my fourth, but we're only doing the 3 that we're agreeing on. But Darrell Green, absolutely. 4 times first team All-Pro, won 2 Super Bowls, I believe. Played 20 years. Had 50-some interceptions in his 20 years. Returned punts, and I think he only
in the
missed
NFL several years running. I mean, I was like 60 years old and still running like a 4 something. Yeah, and just an all-around talent, all-around good guy. Amazing when you're talking to the greatest wide receivers of all time, Jerry Rice being considered the greatest of all time. He always mentions Darrell Green as being one of the best quarterbacks that he had to face. Lockdown corner, just absolutely a menace on the field. Glad there's no argument here because again, he's my favorite Washington player of all time. And I would have been very disappointed if somebody wants to knock him off the Mount Rushmore. But I mean, we are giving people choice in this. It seems like we're a lock for 3.
Yeah. Yeah. And
we'll have an option for this 4th one. And we're going to give them probably a couple options here. Why don't you start with who you recommend for the 4th spot?
I think my 4th is Charlie Taylor. And again, we're going back quite a few years. We're going back to the 60s. I get it. But some of the things, again, that he did while he was here in Washington are absolutely amazing. He played 12, 13 years here in Washington, was number 3 pick in the draft. All of that only with Washington, coached with Washington as well. He won the 3 Super Bowls. He was here for the 3 Super Bowls. First team All-Pro 1 time, 5 times. He was second team All-Pro, 8 Pro Bowls, NFL Rookie of the Year. Led the league in receptions twice, even though he started as a running back. His first couple years, he was a running back, and they kind of pushed him more to be a receiver. All those I think are pretty amazing. One thing that I really liked about what he did is he became the first rookie in like 20 years to finish in the top 10 in both rushing and receiving as a rookie. And so that's pretty amazing. And so I love what Charlie Taylor meant to this organization, being that he was a coach for a long time. He went through a couple of different coaching changes that he stayed on as an assistant coach with Washington until Norv Turner came in and decided that after 30 years he was no longer wanted. I thought that was a punk move by Norv Turner, but I think he's my fourth guy on that list.
I think that's an excellent choice. I don't have him on mine. I'm going to present my option for people. I mean, they don't have to take our options. They can clearly take anyone else that they were thinking that should go on there. But George Allen is my fourth head on this Mount Rushmore for the Washington franchise. You're talking about a coach who went to the playoffs 5 out of the 7 years that they were here. They brought this franchise back to relevance because they had started to fall off, and brought things to this team, namely some of the things that we will forever remember, right? The over the hill gang, him doing 3 cheers for Redskins, hip hip hooray, and most importantly, during his tenure, due to the enthusiastic play, due to how he kind of managed things, this is where the storied rivalry with the Dallas Cowboys came about. Okay. This is where we want Dallas. This is where we started to hate the Dallas Cowboys, not just as a normal division rival, but like in our core being as Washington fans, we cannot like Dallas. Like, we hate them with all the passion. Most of us say something similar to what I say, which is my 2 favorite teams are the Washington franchise, Redskins, Commanders, whatever, right? And whoever's playing the Dallas Cowboys.
Yep. And we say that all the time.
And so that's greatly due in part to what George Allen brought. So that's, to me, a core being of being a Washington fan. And it's because of George Allen and his tenure here in the burgundy and gold.
I don't hate it. I didn't even consider him at all because I think his stint here was too short, only 7 years here in Washington. But I mean, while he was here, you're right. He was an amazing coach, and isn't he the guy you always talk about? He's the guy that led to Joe Gibbs.
Yes.
Or right, because there's the other guy that led to Joe Gibbs. I can't remember that guy.
Yeah, there was an in-between period. But when looking at it, George Allen might not have achieved what Joe Gibbs did, but he did set this franchise on a track that set them up for success, and ended up getting Joe Gibbs, who was able to then propel that next step. And so, yeah, that was a very important part.
Fair choice. So we've got 3 locks. And we've got plenty of guys, honorable mentions that people can choose from, or maybe we didn't even mention a guy that should be on that list. I mean, guys like, I don't know, Gary Clark or Chris Samuels, or some guys like that who could possibly be on somebody's Mount Rushmore. Who is that?
Santana Moss, D'Angelo Hall, Santana Moss. Sure. Some of these guys in the last 30 years. I mean, these are players the fans are still attached to and that still hang around the team. And yeah, there's some good selections out there. I'm interested to see and hear what people have to say. And of course, we're going to be having that discussion on our live Wednesday show. So make sure you join us live 7:30 Eastern right here on YouTube, and catch us talking about all sorts of things, Washington Commanders and DC sports. And you get to help us decide who that 4th head is on the Washington Commanders. I'm Nathan Perry. That's the Stoner here, part of Ref the District, part of the Believe Network. Make sure you head over to Bet Online, use our code BELIEVE, and get yourself a free bet as the new change there. So make sure you use that code BLEAV and get yourself started on some smart betting there on Bet Online. We're Ref the District, brought to you by Bet Online. And until next time,
don't sleep on slinging Sammy Ball.
Be a fan.